The FBI and Interpol have hunted me relentlessly for nearly 2 decades. 19 years of looking over my shoulder, waiting for another knock at the door. 3 separate times the United States government has tried to drag me back to American soil, and 3 times they've failed spectacularly. Even with their precious extradition treaties in force, they couldn't touch me. Not in Europe, not anywhere. The diplomatic machinery of the world's superpower rendered impotent against one tenacious man. U.S. embassies in at least 4 nations were involved in trying to capture me. I survived the suffocating confines of 5 Bulgarian hellholes they called prisons, before finally tasting freedom again. Their frustration eventually boiled over into something truly sinister. An extrajudicial kidnapping plot, conceived in the shadows of diplomatic immunity. When it exploded in their faces, the fallout was delicious. A U.S. embassy official, badge and credentials in hand, forced to pack his bags in disgrace, declared persona non grata, and expelled like a common criminal. After fleeing Bulgaria's clutches, I found myself marooned for 15 excruciating years on a postage stamp of land in the Caribbean. When my body finally betrayed me with a critical illness, I desperately needed specialized surgery that might as well have been on another planet. The FBI, calculating and cold, deliberately slammed every escape route shut, blocking my travel with surgical precision. Their strategy was as transparent as it was cruel. Deny me medical care and wait for nature to accomplish what their legal maneuvers couldn't. They were betting on my death, waiting from afar as their human problem might conveniently solve itself. In 2023, Cuba sent physicians to my home, enabling my desperate flight to their shores. Interpol intercepted me during the journey in the Dominican Republic. When the Dominican Republic witnessed my deteriorating condition, they balked. The prospect of my death on their soil, creating an international spectacle, wasn't on their wish list. America be damned. They made their calculation quickly. Let me become Cuba's responsibility instead. With simple pragmatism, they let me proceed to Cuba. Cuba, meanwhile, waited with welcoming embrace, a lighthouse guiding my desperate escape. Following my critical care in Cuba, I made my way to Russia, where medical experts were prepared to take over from the initial stabilization that Cuban doctors had managed to provide. In December 2023, I received political asylum and formal protection in Russia. Almost 2 years later, my health has seen considerable improvement, and I am progressing toward recovery with additional surgeries to come. Many wonder why the U.S. has hunted me with such ferocious determination, pursuing me even more aggressively in some ways than figures like Assange or Snowden, though I pale in significance compared to them. By all rights, I should barely register on America's radar. Yet they've developed an obsession with me that borders on the pathological, a fixation of truly epic proportions. There's a chasm, a gaping void between the accusations hurled at me and the shadowy truth driving this relentless manhunt. The playbook being used against me mirrors classic intelligence agency tactics from their darkest chapters. Grave allegations used as weapons to demonize and strip away my humanity. They're masterfully manipulating public perception, while their real reasons for their obsession remain hidden behind a curtain of manufactured outrage. I can't help but think of Julian Assange. In 2010, Sweden unleashed accusations of sexual misconduct against him, charges that were wildly exaggerated, even if you took the charges at face value. Though Sweden eventually abandoned these claims in 2019 because of lack of evidence, the poisonous seed had already been planted in the public consciousness. His reputation lay in ruins. What truly makes me suspicious is the British government's staggering, almost fanatical commitment of resources, both financial and legal, to hunting him down. All this for allegations that were relatively insignificant on their face. The disproportionate response reeks of behind-the-scenes pressure and manipulation at the highest levels. Sweden has long been America's willing partner, proven by their shameless participation in CIA rendition flights. In one particularly disturbing case, Swedish officials practically gift-wrapped asylum seekers for the CIA, who whisked these unfortunate souls to Egypt, where they endured brutal torture. Sure, the victims eventually got some cash for their troubles, but not one single Swedish official ever faced consequences for this betrayal. Not one. Until 2018, the US flat out denied Assange's claims that they were hunting him for extradition. A brazen lie exposed when their sealed indictment against him was accidentally leaked that very year. Meanwhile, the British government, playing eager accomplice, hemorrhaged over $30 million of taxpayer money pursuing Assange as if he were public enemy number one. When in the blood-stained annals of British history has so much treasure been squandered hunting a man over flimsy accusations from a foreign power? From day one, I saw through this charade. Sweden was merely a puppet with American hands up its back, and the UK would never have unleashed such a relentless crusade over such trivial Swedish claims if left to its own devices. In my case, even if these preposterous allegations held a shred of truth, they'd constitute nothing more than custodial interference at their absolute worst. Yet somehow, they've been monstrously inflated into full-blown kidnapping charges, despite ironclad evidence proving I wasn't even on American soil when this so-called crime occurred. Let's not overlook the glaring hypocrisy. It was U.S. authorities themselves, their own police, executing a U.S. judge's directive, who physically placed my son on an aircraft and shipped him back to Europe, where he already resided. The suspicious circumstances enveloping these trumped-up charges, coupled with the unprecedented international manhunt launched to capture me, make it virtually impossible to ignore the shadow of hidden agendas lurking beneath this judicial theater. The pattern of response speaks volumes. When in history has America mobilized diplomatic forces across 4 separate nations and weathered 3 failed extradition attempts, all over a child custody case? I challenge you to name a single person the U.S. has ever manhunted through 3 different extradition efforts. You'll find precious few. Pablo Escobar made that exclusive list, but they actually succeeded in extraditing him. And let's face it, the crimes of a notorious drug kingpin hardly stand on equal footing with a father's custody dispute. In October 2009, I stepped onto Bulgarian soil to deliver a talk at a conference, only to have my world shattered when armed Interpol agents ambushed. The accusation? Kidnapping. The next 3 harrowing months of my life unfolded in a nightmarish carousel of incarceration, shuttled between 5 different Bulgarian prison hellholes while I desperately battled the U.S. government's relentless extradition demands in foreign courtrooms. In May 2009, the FBI quietly secured an indictment against me, but they held their cards close, deliberately waiting until October, when they knew I'd touched down in Bulgaria, ensuring I'd be thrown in some of the more harsher prisons available. Throughout the summer months, June, July, August, I moved freely throughout France, the Netherlands, and Belgium, blissfully unaware of the trap being set for me. Court documents later revealed the FBI's predatory patience. They'd been tracking my every move, monitoring my flight records, and even scrutinizing my public speaking engagements. My whereabouts weren't some closely guarded secret. Anyone with the most basic internet skills and access to Google could have pinpointed my location. Yet they waited, calculating the perfect moment to strike. This is an FBI signature move, a calculated game of patience, waiting for their target to wander into hostile territory. Sometimes the FBI even orchestrates the journey themselves with counterfeit conference invitations that promise professional opportunity but deliver steel handcuffs instead. It's all laid out in black and white in the federal prosecutor's handbook, a playbook for how to snatch fugitives from foreign soil when they're most vulnerable. I'd become just another case study in their well-rehearsed strategy of international abduction. Ultimately, Bulgaria denied the U.S.'s desperate plea to drag me back to American soil. When Washington appealed, because they never know when to quit, Bulgaria's high court slammed the door in their faces too. Let me be crystal clear. Despite what some armchair legal experts claim, it wasn't rejected because of some technical reciprocity issue for kidnapping. No, the Bulgarian judiciary saw straight through the smoke and mirrors. They examined the U.S. allegations and declared that even if you accepted their fiction as gospel, it still wouldn't constitute kidnapping under any reasonable definition. The extradition had crashed and burned, but Washington wasn't finished with me yet. They slammed the door on both my American passports by revoking them. Still thirsting for blood, they twisted Bulgaria's arm to boot me out and ship me back to American soil. But I slipped through their fingers one more time, navigating my escape back to the Caribbean sun. I had help. A Bulgarian government official who was fed up to her eyeballs with Washington's web of lies and time-draining charades. plus a former FBI agent who'd walked away from the Bureau in utter revulsion at what it had become. Together, they were my ticket to freedom while Uncle Sam fumed. Meanwhile, back in the Caribbean where we lived, the U.S. Embassy didn't merely make an effort. They planned a complete abduction scheme. They were caught red-handed, and the country's authorities didn't hesitate. They expelled a U.S. Embassy official like yesterday's trash. For those naive enough to protest, the U.S. would never do that. Wake up. The U.S. Supreme Court itself sanctioned this dirty business back in the 1980s, explicitly ruling that Uncle Sam can snatch fugitives from foreign soil at will, trampling over local laws without consequence. This isn't some conspiracy theory. It's been their standard operating procedure for decades, a well-oiled machine of extraterritorial muscle flexing. To tear aside the curtain hiding the FBI's allegations against me and reveal what I suspect lies underneath their true obscure intentions for targeting me with such unwavering fervor. In early 2001, I severed ties with my ex-wife and transplanted my life to European soil. At first, our son remained rooted in his Tennessee birthplace, the only home he'd ever known. But by 2004, the scales of justice finally tipped in my favor. After my ex-wife brazenly defied court orders time and time again, despite the judge's repeated warnings, custody was wrenched from her grasp and placed in mine. The court's decision wasn't made lightly. It came only after legitimate grave concerns surfaced about her fitness to raise our child. She continued to flagrantly thumb her nose at the law. You might even say give the judge the finger with her brazen disregard. She took the desperate step of fleeing across state lines with our son, vanishing into the shadows. Consequently, it wasn't until 2005 that he finally set foot on European soil to begin his life with me. The courts granted me complete custody, an absolute mandate that included the freedom to traverse the globe with him without so much as a nod from her. Despite this total legal victory, I still carved out summer visitation for his mother, shouldering the financial burden of his journeys back and forth across the Atlantic. In June 2006, I escorted our son across the Atlantic for his summer visitation. We touched down in Boston, where he was handed off to an airline child escort for the final leg to Pennsylvania. I lingered in Boston for a brief, intense week immersed in Microsoft Business, my employer at the time. By mid-June, I'd vanished back across the ocean to European shores, never again setting foot on American soil. At the end of the summer, his mother defiantly refused to return him. By then, she had transplanted herself to another state and somehow persuaded a court that my son had drawn his first breath there. Not in Tennessee, where he'd actually entered this world. Despite her legal maneuvers, the Pennsylvania court, where she had now nested, commanded her to send him back across the Atlantic to Europe. She dug in her heels and defied the order, forcing the court's hand. They dispatched police officers to physically extract him from her custody and escort him to the airport. Another dramatic act in this heart-wrenching transatlantic custody battle. 3 months later in December, she severed our lifeline, disconnecting her telephone, which had been the primary channel between her and our son. Little did I know then, this deliberate disconnection was merely the opening gambit in a more sinister endgame, laying groundwork, under the FBI's careful tutelage, for trumped-up kidnapping charges against me. Skip ahead to May 2009. In a clandestine operation orchestrated with the FBI, she secured my indictment on federal kidnapping charges during a secret closed-door hearing, a proceeding I and my attorneys weren't merely excluded from, but never even notified existed. With her serving as the lone witness, I stood accused of a kidnapping allegedly committed on November 2006, a date when neither my son nor I were even on American soil. The bitter irony? Just 2 months before the supposed crime, my son had departed the U.S. in the custody of police officers, who physically removed him from his mother's grasp under explicit judicial command. Some claim I'm merely facing custodial interference charges, not kidnapping. But to stark truth, the indictment explicitly accuses me of physically abducting my son in November 2006, branded unequivocally as a kidnapping. Others dismiss it as a simple typographical error, a missing comma. Yet the FBI shattered that defense when they deliberately informed the press that I had, in their words, physically removed him. The accusations stand in naked contradiction to reality. The CIA strategically targets individuals for recruitment based on their access, influence, and potential utility in intelligence operations. Key categories individuals sought include 1. Individuals with direct access to sensitive information. 2. Individuals who have family, business, or other close connections to individuals with access to confidential data. 3. Frequent international travelers who traveled extensively for business or personal reasons are vital as couriers or to gather intelligence across borders. The CIA favors identifying and recruiting individuals who already possess a natural operational facade, rather than bringing on recruits who require the development of a cover identity, a process that frequently demands more than a decade to establish credibility. Former CIA officer Andrew Bustamante and others have discussed the agency's recruitment strategies, emphasizing the importance of profiling to identify individuals for recruitment. These targeted recruitment efforts underscore the CIA's focus on individuals whose positions or connections can facilitate the acquisition of critical intelligence, often employing tailored psychological and situational strategies to secure their cooperation. I've often found myself wondering why America would pour such vast resources into hunting me down over these many years. Several theories haunt my thoughts. None I can prove beyond a doubt, but each deserves serious consideration in this bizarre chess game I never asked to play. What about me has Uncle Sam so obsessively fixated that they'll incinerate millions of taxpayer funds and stubbornly stalk me like bloodhounds for nearly 2 decades? 19 years of this merciless, unrelenting manhunt. 19 years of looking over my shoulder. And for what purpose? What possible justification could warrant such a breathtaking waste of resources and time? Let's unravel 3 disturbing possibilities. For those just discovering my ordeal, they often suggest this whole nightmare sprang from a cascade of bureaucratic blunders that spiraled into chaos. Misidentification of my son's birthplace, botched legal paperwork, and the stubborn persistence of these errors might explain the relentless manhunt. Was it also mere oversight that they somehow missed my 3-year absence from the American soil prior to the date of the kidnapping? And how does the FBI, with all its resources and power, stubbornly insist I come from Titusville, a town I've never once spent a single night in, let alone called home? Pennsylvania soil may have nurtured my early years, but I severed those ties back in 1994, never even living in the same county as this phantom hometown they've assigned me. If these are merely careless errors, then these FBI bureaucrats shouldn't be trusted with safety scissors in the break room, much less badges and guns to hunt American citizens. I suppose this explains why they're called special agents. Special indeed, with their spectacular talent for fabricating facts while missing mountains of evidence. Even if we chalk these up to innocent blunders, the sheer parade of high-ranking officials who've pawed through my case file, FBI brass, federal court judges, Justice Department suits, State Department pencil pushers, and even the shadow dwellers at the NSA, are far too many for anyone with half a brain not to raise a red flag and back away from this circus. Yet at every rung of power, they double down and charge ahead. Yes, that NSA, the all-seeing, all-hearing behemoth. What business do America's premier eavesdroppers have in my affairs? This hypothesis might sound plausible to someone unfamiliar with the sordid details of my predicament. But once you grasp the full picture, the theory crumbles like a house of cards in a hurricane. We're not witnessing some bumbling, accidental witch hunt here. No. What's happening to me reeks of calculation, of deliberate intent. Every move against me has been choreographed with chilling precision. Lurking beneath the surface, suspect career ambition plays a dangerous role. In these high-profile cases, certain agents and prosecutors just don't see criminals. They see stepping stones to promotion and recognition. I've witnessed the disturbing pattern where ambitious officials transform ordinary citizens into career-making spectacles. The evidence is troubling. Law enforcement and intelligence agencies have repeatedly manufactured or inflated cases, twisting facts into narratives that justify their heavy-handed tactics and bloated budgets. The temptation to become the hero who caught a big fish proves too seductive for some to resist. The FBI special agent, shackled in my case, clearly took a career nosedive before landing in my orbit. This guy once held a prestigious position at headquarters across state lines. Then mysteriously, he found himself demoted to the backwaters of a Pittsburgh branch office, a city where neither he nor his wife appear to have a single prior route or connection. I can't help but wonder what spectacular failure earned him this professional exile. Generally, this happens when someone in the Bureau crosses a line they shouldn't, the kind of transgression the higher-ups desperately want buried. When that happens, these agents don't get fired, they get exiled to professional purgatories. While I still harbor deep affection for my hometown of Erie, let's not sugarcoat reality. It's a Rust Belt casualty bleeding residents by the tens of thousands. In just 2 decades, it plummeted from Pennsylvania's third largest city to fifth, hemorrhaging population as factories shuttered. Now it's distinguished only by zip codes that rank among America's most impoverished, crime statistics that make even seasoned law enforcement wince. Trust me, nobody without Erie blood in their veins ever volunteers for an assignment there. This isn't a destination, it's a punishment. The Attorney General who greenlit my case, Mary Beth Buchanan, wasn't just ambitious. She's notorious for ballooning investigations into media spectacles. Her reputation precedes her like a storm front. This is the same prosecutor who dragged Tommy Chong, yes, that Tommy Chong from Cheech and Chong, into a Pennsylvania courtroom and ultimately a prison cell. She orchestrated an elaborate trap for his son, then squeezed Tommy until he shouldered the blame for crimes he never committed, all to add another celebrity scalp to her collection. The theory sticks to me like a burr. This FBI special agent was desperate to resurrect his fading career, buried in Erie's frozen wasteland. Career-making cases are as rare as sunshine in January. Sure, they had the pizza bomber, that bizarre local horror show, but when that exploded, they swarmed in with hotshots from Pittsburgh and D.C. faster than vultures to roadkill. The brass wasn't about to let some forgotten field office agents claim that trophy. No, they needed their own white whale, and I was it. A tried-and-true tactic of the FBI is to manufacture their own monsters, then parade as heroes when they slay them. Hundreds of documented cases litter the landscape of American justice. Take the Newburgh Four, pawns sacrificed on the chessboard of federal ambition. Their lives, collateral damage in the Bureau's desperate hunt for headlines. The Newburgh Four, perfect examples of the Bureau's handiwork. 4 desperate men, convicted of plotting to bomb synagogues and shoot down military aircraft. But dig beneath the headlines and you'll find the FBI's fingerprints everywhere. They didn't just catch the plot, they created it. The Bureau recruited these men, bankrolled the entire operation, and puppeteered every move from the shadows. Another manufactured threat to justify their existence with real human lives as the cost. 11 years later, when the brutal truth finally clawed its way into daylight, the judge who presided over the case did not mince words. The judge declared these men not terrorists, their voice echoing through that courtroom like a death knell for the Bureau's narrative. The FBI hadn't just bet the truth. They'd manufactured an entire criminal conspiracy from scratch, conjuring terror from thin air where none existed before. Let's listen to the judge's own words, and I quote, "The government came up with the crime, provided the means, and removed all relevant obstacles, making a terrorist out of someone whose buffoonery is positively Shakespearean in scope." Despite this, the judge upheld their conviction, citing the narrow constraints of the law, but made it crystal clear that the FBI's role in manufacturing the case was deeply troubling. Then there's the nightmare of Richard Jewell and these shadowy black sites lurking in Chicago. For every case that claws its way into light, how many more victims remain buried in darkness? Their voices silenced simply because they lacked the resources or strength to fight back against this overwhelmingly powerful machine. This theory has more meat on its bones than the last, I'll grant you that, but it still doesn't pass a smell test. These cases typically stay locked within a single FBI district's boundaries. They don't metastasize to U.S. embassies scattered across multiple countries, entangle the State Department, pull in the NSA, or trigger international extradition mechanisms. The sheer number of power players who've been dragged into my hunt is staggering. Far too many for this to be merely the desperate gambit of some previously sidelined agent clawing his way back up the Bureau's ladder after a demotion. The most speculative theory, one that still haunts my waking thoughts, is that intelligence agencies earmark me as a potential asset, hungrily eyeing my professional pedigree and my vast globe-spanning network of connections. I can't definitively prove this clandestine chess match exists, but it would explain the relentless, almost predatory interest and the bone-chilling persistence fueling every attempt to detain and extradite me from safe harbors. Previous recruitment attempts and those unexplained moments of intense scrutiny during my travels only strengthened my suspicions. The pattern is there, but I still can't definitively claim this as truth. Just the most unsettling explanation that fits all the pieces. This is the most outlandish theory of all, or perhaps the most terrifying in its plausibility. Hear me out. For years, I banished this thought to the darkest corners of my mind. But when I began dialogues with journalists, former FBI operatives, and retired intelligence personnel, they all whispered the same chilling assessment. There's something massive lurking beneath the surface here, Jad, whether you're ready to accept it or not. One of them spent time explaining to me and posed in-depth questions about my job and background. Suddenly, things started to click into place. The U.S. intelligence agencies circled me like hungry wolves, desperate to claim me as their asset. And for good reason. Their persistence bordered on obsession. After I rebuffed them repeatedly, they finally slid across the table an offer they were certain would break my resolve. Before you roll your eyes in disbelief, ask yourself, what would drive them to pour millions into a, quote, custody case that's about as substantial as toilet paper in a hurricane? I want to be honest, I can't prove this or any of the ideas, but let me walk you through some key points. The truth here is suffocating beneath so much smoke that this theory just isn't plausible. It's damn near inescapable, like a neon sign flashing in the darkness. It stands as the only explanation that makes any sense when you connect the dots. Previously, I talked about the 3 primary reasons that American intelligence seeks individuals for recruitment. Just one of these reasons is sufficient to classify someone as a target. I ticked off all 3 of the targeting criteria, rendering me an exceptionally appealing target. How does living under constant scrutiny feel when all you've done is say, I do? In early 2001, I plunged into the heart of Russia, starting a new chapter in my life. I married a Russian woman to whom I'm still married to today. The moment I slipped that ring on her finger, her family, who worked with military tech secrets at the highest levels, had to file a detailed report about me with the Russian security apparatus. Just like that, I found myself under the watchful eye of Russian intelligence. Every month as I crossed Russian borders, coming and going, their curiosity about me only intensified, each stamp on my passport raising more eyebrows in Moscow. I had a friend stateside with a security clearance who married a Russian citizen. Just like that, his bride found herself under the FBI's microscope, her name inked onto watch lists while agents scrutinized her every move. That's the game of national security. No country plays it differently. Russia, America, the rule book reads the same when foreigners marry into a family with sensitive clearances. The Russian security services never laid a finger on me, but they made sure I knew they were watching. Shadows at my periphery, whispers trailing my footsteps. Their message was crystal clear. Behave and you have nothing to worry about. Every time I headed through immigration, the clock seemed to stop. My passage deliberately stalled while other travelers flowed past. Then would come the inevitable arrival of extra people and the polite but firm request to step into a side room where stone-faced officers would ask me about my travel plans. After I landed on that watch list, the Americans sniffed it out. But they were stumbling in the dark about why. That little red flag, though, it lit a fire under them. Suddenly, I wasn't just Moscow's pet project, I was Washington's newest intelligence crush, too. Then 9/11 shattered our world. Let me be crystal clear. I have absolutely no connection to those atrocities, and I am not implying any associations whatsoever. But in the aftermath, U.S. intelligence agencies gorged themselves on newfound resources, swelling to monstrous proportions almost overnight. They cast their nets wider than ever, dragging the depths for anyone remotely interesting, and somehow, I became an exotic fish they couldn't stop watching. Traveling in and out of the U.S. morphed into a gauntlet of suspicion. Bizarre treatment for someone born under the stars and stripes. I wasn't just catching sideways glances anymore. I was drowning in extreme, suffocating scrutiny, even when hopping between American cities. The message couldn't have been clearer if they'd tattooed it on my forehead. I had earned myself a spot on some shadowy, off-the-books watch list that normal citizens weren't supposed to know existed. I was living the same nightmare as Laura Poitras, that Oscar-winning journalist who got dragged into secondary screening more than 50 times over 6 years by the CBP goons. This isn't conspiracy theory. It's textbook government intimidation. After her 2006 Iraq war film touched nerves in high places, she became border-crossing prey. The feds never had the decency to explain themselves, but anyone with half a brain knows her crime. Daring to report on national security and later giving voice to whistleblowers like Snowden. When she finally sued those bastards, the documents confirmed what we already knew. They'd branded her a security risk without a shred of evidence. Classic American playbook, and now I was trapped in its pages too. Why were there foreign police at our door, and who was behind it? In the twilight of 2002, police stormed our Cyprus apartment, ransacking our home at the request of the American embassy. The invasion came without warning, without reason, just a thunderous pounding at our door and the systematic violation of our private space. To this day, not a single word of explanation has crossed their lips, leaving me to wonder what shadows from Washington had reached across the ocean to find me. In the shadowy aftermath, we unearthed the disturbing truth. The U.S. Embassy had essentially swatted us. They had compiled a massive dossier on my wife and her kin, stuffed with intimate particulars about her family's life that had never passed our lips. Personal secrets harvested without our knowledge, now imprisoned in diplomatic files of the US government. What happens when a dream job puts you in the crosshairs of international espionage? In 2004, I plunged into the corporate giant that is Microsoft, landing a coveted senior position. I navigated through the ranks, claiming titles like Microsoft Regional Developer Advisor and Microsoft Regional Director. My territory? The sprawling expanse of Microsoft Middle East and Africa, a dizzying patchwork of 85 countries that kept me perpetually airborne, my passport collecting stamps like badges of honor as I crisscrossed this diverse landscape. I clutched a treasure few Westerners held: multi-entry visas for Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and a constellation of other politically complex nations. Documents that in those post-9/11 days were as rare as desert rain. My calendar read like diplomatic dispatches, with meetings where I regularly locked eyes with government power brokers, cabinet ministers whose decisions shaped millions of lives, directors of federal agencies wielding nation-sized budgets, and occasionally members of royal families whose handshakes carried the weight of centuries-old dynasties. This elevated access, coupled with the Americans' prior fascination with me due to my in-laws' high-level Russian military clearance, transformed me into irresistible recruitment bait. I was swimming in waters where intelligent sharks circled, drawn by the blood scent of my unique connections. Between 2005 and 2008, at least 3 recruitment overtures dangled eye-watering sums of money before me. These people don't simply approach with a handshake and introduce themselves as spies. They operate in the shadows and whispers, leaving no paper trail. I've peeled back the curtain on these encounters in previous videos, and trust me, their intentions left nothing to interpretation. They were fishing for assets, and I was the prize catch they hoped to reel in. I shut down their advances at every turn. Microsoft had handed me the golden ticket, a dream job with compensation that kept me more than comfortable. Yet these shadowy players persisted, dangling financial carrots that would make most men's knees buckle. The figures they whispered grew more obscene with each encounter, but something in my gut recoiled at the thought of stepping into their world. Still, like determined predators sensing vulnerability, they circled back repeatedly, their offers swelling like storm clouds heavy with rain. Can one wrong choice in a bar lead to a life-altering allegiance with the CIA? Edward Snowden blew the lid off how the CIA orchestrated a masterful entrapment operation, luring an unsuspecting Swiss banker into their web and squeezing him until he cracked, likely transforming him from financial professional to reluctant informant in their shadowy intelligence game. The CIA was desperate to pry into the financial secrets of random elites, convinced that cracking open these private vaults would somehow serve their greater good. Their target? A banker, guardian of wealth for the privileged. They came at him again and again, whispering promises, making threats. He held his ground each time, until finally they crafted that perfect poison apple, a proposition so seductive, so impossible to resist, that they hoped he'd have no choice but to bite. After months of getting nowhere, Snowden says the agency finally played their trump card to break the banker's resolve. They went straight for his Achilles heel with surgical precision. One night, a CIA operative deliberately plied him with drink after drink, glass after glass, until he was swimming in alcohol. Then, despite taxis waiting right outside, the same agent practically shoved the man's keys into his trembling hand and all but pushed him toward his car. A calculated trap baited and sprung in the darkness of a single evening. Drunk driving in Europe, especially Switzerland, hangs over you like a guillotine blade, far more damaging to your future than anything back in the States. Penalties cut straight to the bone. Fines aren't some fixed slap on the wrist. They're calculated to bleed you financially, a merciless percentage of your income designed to make even the wealthiest feel the sting of their transgression. Unbeknownst to the banker, CIA assets had already whispered his license plate into the ears of the Swiss police. By the time his tires hit the road, police cars were circling like sharks following the scent of blood. His legal nightmare unfolded exactly as they'd planned. Driver's license ripped away, and fines that even to a Swiss banker would feel like a gut punch. Another piece positioned perfectly on their chessboard. Next, the CIA swooped in like guardian angels, giving him rides to work for months and slipping him cash to pay the fines and legal costs, all while the noose of debt tightened around his neck. Then came the moment when the mask dropped. Their kindness evaporated as they revealed their true game. They wanted him to become their eyes and ears in the banking world. He wasn't being rescued. He was being coerced and recruited. Some sources say the banker was successfully recruited. Others say he refused to cooperate. What is certain is that he lost his job and had to leave the country. I've seen this playbook firsthand, how U.S. intelligence operatives corner their targets like predators stalking wounded prey. They manipulate and pressure individuals mercilessly, weaponizing personal weaknesses and circumstances until cooperation seems like the only escape. Their tactics aren't just deceptive, they're fundamentally unethical, stripping away human dignity while hiding behind the shield of national security. Snowden merely confirmed what I already knew from the shadows. While Interpol held me prisoner, an American intelligence officer interrogated me. His eyes lit with unmistakable hunger when he found the numerous Pakistani stamps on my passport. Islamabad, one of the very cities where they tried to sink their hooks into me just 2 years earlier, was of extreme interest to him. He worked me like a mark they couldn't afford to lose. Later, while I languished in a Bulgarian prison cell, an FBI agent materialized before me like a ghost of Christmas future. She dangled the promise of freedom with practiced precision. We could work things out if you surrendered and cooperated. Some might split hairs about whether this constituted a straightforward offer, but I knew better. This is the choreographed dance of intelligence agencies. Their words draped in plausible deniability while their intentions blazed unmistakably clear, like a neon sign in a disused gas station toilet. This was further supported by the crushing weight of American influence bearing down on Bulgaria to fast-track my handover. I doubt the FBI agent herself even comprehended the full scope of what she was offering. She was merely a pawn delivering someone else's message. They're obsessed with maintaining plausible deniability, constructing their schemes so that when the ugly truth surfaces, they can simply shrug and declare, "That's not what we meant at all. He's just fantasizing." The pattern aligns perfectly with what Snowden exposed about the Swiss banker, a carbon copy of the American playbook. The Swiss banker saga unfolded in 2007, a mere heartbeat just 2 years before they set their trap for me in Bulgaria. And let's be brutally honest, as a target, I likely glowed brighter on their radar than some anonymous Swiss money handler ever did. Edward Snowden's account of this incident was said to be a watershed moment for him, the brutal awakening that tore away his illusions about American intelligence agencies and their moral bankruptcy. It was his point of no return, just as I would later face my own. How does a fugitive use social media to turn the spotlight back on the authorities hunting him? When they slapped the cuffs on me in 2009, the FBI turned me into their favorite conversation piece. They couldn't help themselves, constantly whispering in journalists' ears. Before I knew it, my name was splashed across headlines worldwide, courtesy of the Associated Press and Reuters' feeding frenzy. In Bulgaria, they went so far as to brand me with the absurd moniker, the American Taliban. In 2017, I pulled off a little deception of my own. They fell for it completely, candidly discussing my case and revealing their hand. They were still hunting me with dogged determination, the pursuit as active as ever. By 2021, the FBI had clamped their lips shut, grudgingly admitting only the bare minimum, that I remained on their wanted list. But once I started broadcasting my tale to the masses and racked up a staggering 150 million views across TikTok and beyond, they suddenly changed their tune. My digital megaphone had forced their hand yet again. There were moments when the FBI would swoop in on journalists curious about my narrative, whispering dark warnings that any conversation with me might be twisted into aiding and abetting a fugitive. While most media outlets recognized the FBI's threat as legally toothless, the specter of astronomical legal fees was enough to make even the boldest editorial teams back away. The mere shadow of potential litigation effectively silenced my story with reporters across America. This is why the vast majority of my story has unfolded through international outlets, which are mostly beyond the reach of America's intimidation tactics. Next, the FBI went completely dark, stonewalling reporters about my situation and even refusing to acknowledge I remained a wanted man, despite my arrest warrant sitting in plain view on public databases. This calculated silence strangled countless news stories in their cradle. Without the Bureau's confirmation, even journalists who'd shown interest found themselves hesitant to pursue my narrative, their investigative momentum smothered under the weight of official non-response. Lately, I've reached out to the FBI myself, masquerading as a journalist and capturing every word of those exchanges on tape. I've gone so far as to reveal my actual identity during these calls. Conversations? Absolutely priceless. I've shared these recordings across my social media platforms, where you can hear the absurdity unfold in real time. The hunter and the hunted dancing around each other in surreal verbal tango. How does a viral TikTok challenge turn into a confrontational battle against the FBI? The FBI and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC as they're known, orchestrated what I can only describe as a masterful jurisdictional circle jerk. While the FBI brandished NCMEC's missing poster as their smoking gun, NCMEC turned right around and pointed to the FBI as the foundation for that very same poster. A perfect, maddening loop of bureaucratic bumbling. In 2008, when they initially published my son's missing poster, my lawyer informed them that he was not actually missing. Their reply was that only a court order could lead to the removal of his poster. In July 2022, mere hours after I unleashed a viral TikTok that tagged them, they sprang into action, yanking my son's poster down as if it had never existed, and promptly blocked my TikTok account. Then I unleashed another TikTok, rallying viewers to bombard NCMEC with calls, demanding answers about why my son's poster vanished and whether he'd been found. NCMEC has gone stone cold silent. Not a whisper, not a word. Fully aware that a massive multi-million-dollar lawsuit looms on their horizon. The bitter twist? Qualified immunity. That infamous legal shield has been stretched to cover NCMEC too. This outrageous protection lets cops and certain government entities trample rights with impunity, unless some court has already condemned that precise violation. Without that previous ruling, they simply walk away untouchable. NCMEC isn't some government agency hiding behind official walls. It's a private nonprofit masquerading with government power. Technically, qualified immunity should not shield them from my legal assault. Yet the courts have repeatedly crowned NCMEC with government-like status because they're in bed with law enforcement. Their fingers are intertwined so deeply that they've grown emboldened, reckless, untouchable, acting with cavalier disregard that makes my blood boil. What happens when the so-called justice system becomes an elaborate trap designed to silence the innocent? I've extended countless invitations to battle this out in court, to finally put the matter to rest. Yet each time the FBI blocks our path to justice. They'd never risk a trial. Not when it would force them to admit they concocted lies about my son's birthplace, my location during November 2006, and the fact that I've never once called Titusville home. No prosecutor in their right mind would dare stand before a judge and jury, knowing they'd face a tidal wave of humiliation for such deception. Nearly all federal criminal cases, a staggering 98%, end not with justice, but with surrender through plea deals. The feds have perfected their game. They lock you away for years on end while dangling the poisoned apple before you. Confess, they whisper, and we'll ease your financial bleeding, downgrade the charges, and hey, you can walk out today, time served. It's not justice they're after, it's submission. Even though the Federal Speedy Trials Act demands a 70-day time frame, the reality is a nightmare of endless waiting. Defendants, people just like you and me, rot in jail cells for 1 to 2 years before ever seeing a courtroom. In the most egregious cases, 5 or even 15 years of their lives evaporate while justice crawls. The government with its infinite resources can freeze the clock for virtually any excuse they dream up. And here's their most devious trick. They'll squeeze and manipulate circumstances until we, the defense, are forced to beg for delays ourselves. That way their hands appear clean while they're actually orchestrating the entire charade from behind a curtain. The moment I cave to their plea deal, I'm shackled to probation for years in a country I haven't called home since the turn of the millennium. As a freshly minted felon, I'd be trapped in an economic wasteland, one struggling county in Pennsylvania where jobs evaporate at the mere sight of my conviction. No roof over my head, no prospects on the horizon. Meanwhile, my wife, without a shred of American citizenship or any desire to transplant her life to those shores, would be left stranded in our reality while I serve my sentence in purgatory. What's even more preposterous is that the state case, which this entire federal house of cards teeters, was never even finalized. It was merely a temporary order devoid of any actual charges, and was finally dismissed into legal nothingness years ago. Yet here we are, with the feds building their empire of sand on a foundation that doesn't exist. What would you do if every path to a fair trial was blocked, leaving you stranded with your life on the line? Clinging to life and haunted by the specter of my deteriorating health, I've repeatedly extended desperate olive branches to the FBI. I've offered to surrender myself willingly, to walk straight into their custody, asking for just 2 basic human considerations in return: the medical care my failing body desperately needed, and the simple assurance that I'd receive my day in court within the 70-day time frame that the Federal Speedy Trials Act guarantees every American. No bureaucratic delays, no tactical extensions, just a swift justice that isn't merely my preference, but my fundamental legal right as spelled out in black and white. Time and again, American courts have decreed that while government officials are technically shackled to provide health care, or even preserve the very lives of those they imprison, This duty crumbles into nothing but hollow promises scrawled on parchment. The brutal, unvarnished truth: despite the Constitution's grand pledges of protection, those trapped in custody face a medical hellscape, clawing through a nightmarish labyrinth of resource-gutted facilities, soul-crushing delays, and medical centers that would make third-world clinics look like Mayo Clinic. In the final twist of the knife, they often demand co-pays from people who don't even have a penny of income to their names because they lack employment. Because, prison. Each time the FBI slammed the door in my face. If they're supposedly drowning in this towering avalanche of evidence, even going so far as to trumpet my guilt to foreign governments before I've even stepped a foot in a courtroom, hasn't nearly 2 decades given them more than enough time to get their act together? During a forced hearing in 2022 that the FBI fought tooth and nail to prevent, they had the sheer audacity to claim I wasn't even entitled to that basic legal courtesy. Then they flatly refused to mount another extradition effort from St. Kitts. Their previous humiliating failure there apparently too bitter a pill for their bloated bureaucratic ego to swallow for a 4th time. They denied me access to a required air ambulance, a lifeline they'd be legally obligated to provide if they succeeded in hauling me back to American soil. Instead, they had the breathtaking audacity to insist my only salvation lay in surrendering myself at a phantom U.S. embassy. St. Kitts is an island barren of any American diplomatic presence. The nearest embassy looms in Barbados, a staggering 600 kilometers across treacherous open water, reachable only by boat or plane. A sadistic mockery for someone battling my deteriorating medical condition at the time. How do you hold on to hope in a sea of despair? I endured excruciating, mind-shattering pain every single day for years on end. Doctors describe my condition as more agonizing than taking a bullet to the body daily. A torment beyond imagination. Most days I could barely drag myself across the floor, my legs betraying me with each attempted step. Even forming words became a battle, as the right side of my face would seize up completely, trapping my thoughts behind a mask of frozen muscles. Occasionally, once every 1 to 3 months, the pain would mysteriously vanish like a morning fog, granting me a fleeting taste of freedom to venture beyond my prison of walls. However, most days I remained shackled to my bedroom, a hostage in my own home, the outside world an impossible dream beyond my reach. St. Kitts houses around 35,000 people on its shores, counting even the smallest children among them. The medical facility, a primitive outpost of healthcare, where even procedures considered simple in developed nations result in evacuation by air ambulance. My condition might as well have been written in hieroglyphics to them, utterly beyond their capacity to decipher or treat. The surgical instruments required for my treatment existed only in faraway lands, as foreign to this island as snow. Air evacuation services slammed their doors in my face, cowering at the mere mention of my fugitive status, trembling before the specter of U.S. sanctions that might crush them. Private planes had price tags that dangled like an impossible ransom, astronomical beyond reason. Their suspicious eyes narrowed when we explained our need to navigate around Puerto Rico's airspace, that American territory looming like a fortress between St. Kitts and Cuba, blocking my path to salvation. I scoured the maritime options, but the journey by sea would have been an excruciating odyssey, far too prolonged and violent for my condition. Even eastern Cuba stretched more than 1,000 miles across churning waters, and Puerto Rico still loomed in my path like an American sentinel, forcing any sea passage into an even more tortuous detour. My salvation lay across an ocean that seemed determined to swallow me whole. As a last resort, we reached out to Cuba. Cuban physicians descended upon my residence like angels of mercy, methodically pulling me back from the abyss over 12 grueling months until I could, just barely, endure the torture of air travel. Even then, fate nearly slammed the door in my face. I was imprisoned in a wheelchair, my dignity stripped away by adult diapers, my body a betrayal of everything I once was. The medical team pumped me full of pain medication at doses that would make a pharmacist flinch. I was soaring through chemical clouds long before my plane ever left the runway. In truth, I had absolutely no business being wheeled onto a regular commercial flight. My condition so dire that it remains a small miracle the airline staff didn't take one horrified look at my broken form and deny me passage then and there. How do you evade Interpol when the odds are stacked against you? Direct flights from St. Kitts to Cuba were non-existent, compelling us to navigate a connection through the Dominican Republic. We made it a point to confirm with the airline that we could remain safely cocooned in the transit area, avoiding the need of passing through immigration checkpoints and thus being detained again by Interpol. Upon reaching the Dominican Republic, we slammed headfirst into a crisis. while passengers from other flights breezed straight to the transit area. Our plane, ours alone, was deliberately diverted to immigration. Their stone-faced officials delivered the gut-punch news. Every single one of us would be forced through immigration. This was wildly irregular, an aviation anomaly. Countless travelers routinely lack proper documentation and are confined to the sterile limbo of transit zones. Yet these officials stubbornly insisted our aircraft alone demanded this special treatment, smoothly reassuring us it wasn't an issue because our flight was sparsely populated and everyone clutched passports that supposedly granted visa-free entry. Their confidence only deepened my suspicion. The rest of the travelers flowed like sheep through the immigration gauntlet, each receiving those telltale Dominican Republic stamps, entry and then exit marks pressed into passport pages with bureaucratic finality. I watched them go one by one, knowing the invisible tripwire that awaited me. We refused. They persisted, circling like vultures, demanding explanations for our defiance, incredulous that anyone with St. Kitts passports, supposedly golden keys to borderless travel, would refuse their generous offer. To perfect their theater of degradation, they positioned my wheelchair directly before the Interpol office, a calculated placement that transformed me into both spectacle and warning. My condition displayed like a trophy at the threshold of international law enforcement. They delivered their ultimatum with cold precision. Refuse immigration, and we'd be shipped back to St. Kitts like unwanted cargo. The cruel irony hung in the air between us. Our aircraft was not returning to St. Kitts, but was continuing on elsewhere. We'd be stranded for days in this limbo, hostages to the schedule of the next available flight. The bureaucratic trap had been perfectly set. I adamantly insisted that we would inhabit this immigration purgatory, reduced to pleading with arriving travelers for sustenance, and oh yeah, I reminded them, live streaming it in real time to my hundreds of thousands of social media followers. They demanded our passports, and after tense deliberation, we grudgingly handed them over, refusing to pass through immigration. A mountain of a man seized our documents and disappeared with them back to some bureaucratic black hole. Meanwhile, my wife, not even half his size, with the spirit of a tempest, unleashed what I can only describe as opening a can of pure Siberian whoop ass upon this human colossus. Eventually, they determined the United States could go straight to hell. They wanted absolutely no piece of this health crisis or potential death becoming their public relations catastrophe. And to be honest, I think they were genuinely terrified of my wife. They opted to let the Americans tango with Cuba instead, washing their hands of our entire messy situation. They escorted us to the formerly forbidden transit zone where our salvation, a Cuba-bound aircraft, waited with open doors. As we boarded, I felt little relief. I knew this nightmare was not finished yet. We'd barely settled into our seats when two uniformed officers came aboard the plane. I knew with absolute certainty they were hunting for me. Their voices crackled over the PA system, asking me to press my call button to reveal my position. They only asked me for my passport, completely ignoring my wife and daughter beside me. I alone was their target. After what felt like an eternity, they exchanged knowing glances, returned my passport, and vanished from the plane as abruptly as they'd appeared. What happens when your passport sparks a digital alarm in Cuba? We'd reached out to federal Cuban officials and medical contacts on the island, engaging in candid conversations about our situation. Yet none of our connections stretched into the critical realms of immigration or justice. Our contacts offered reassurance, their voices confident as they told me that we'd probably sail through without a hitch. Still, there was that lingering uncertainty in their eyes. They couldn't guarantee what might unfold when we actually faced those border officials, standing there with our passports in hand and our fate hanging in the balance. Since Obama's push to thaw the icy U.S.-Cuban diplomatic relations and the resurrection of the American embassy in Havana's weathered streets, people had been shipped back to American soil like unwanted parcels. I sure as heck had no desire to swap my freedom for the suffocating confines of a Cuban prison cell. St. Kitts stands as one of the precious few countries whose passport holders can slip into Cuba unencumbered by visa paperwork. The current prime minister, a Cuba-educated man himself, forged his academic path on those communist shores long before claiming political power back home. Their diplomatic bonds run deep. Being a doctor before a politician, the prime minister understood the precarious nature of my medical condition firsthand. We leveraged this connection along with our carefully cultivated relationships within Cuban governmental circles, keeping a lifeline of emergency numbers at the ready should our carefully laid plans unravel at any moment. I tore myself away from my family. Striding towards one of the imposing immigration counters, my wife and daughter lingered in the sterile limbo of the transit zone, hanging back in the shadows to witness the dangerous theater of my entry attempt unfold. The monitor was angled just enough for me to catch the glimpses without deciphering the actual text. When my passport slid through the scanner, the screen exploded into a carnival of flashing warnings, red and amber alerts dancing across the display like fireworks. The immigration officer's face remained an impenetrable mask of indifference, as though my arrival had been penciled into his calendar for weeks. Not a flicker of surprise disturbed his practiced stoicism despite the digital fireworks before him. He lifted a desk phone to his ear and commanded me to remain where I stood, his voice flat and emotionless. I asked if there was a problem, but his grasp of English barely stretched beyond a few scattered words. Despite the digital chaos on his screen, he maintained the serene composure of a chess master contemplating his next move. So I stood my ground and waited. A few minutes passed and a female officer materialized through the crowd of other passengers. She engaged in rapid-fire Spanish with my stone-faced gatekeeper, their hushed conversation stretching on while I deciphered nothing but the occasional glance in my direction. Then she vanished as suddenly as she'd appeared. With mechanical precision, he brought his stamp down on my passport with a decisive thunk, the sound of bureaucratic permission, and finally granted me passage to Cuba with a perfunctory welcome that barely disturbed the air between us. Next came my wife and daughter's turn. I positioned myself behind the booth where I could peer over at the computer monitor, though its contents remained frustratingly indecipherable at my distance. When the officer slid my wife and daughter's St. Kitts passport through the scanner, the screen remained serene. None of the alarming digital convulsions it had thrown during my own processing. I spent weeks in the hospital, recovering enough that I could be transported on to Russia. I'm eternally grateful to the Cuban staff and medical doctors who assisted me while I was there. Because of the economics of the island, especially after both COVID and the two big hurricanes, they were unable to treat me completely. All they could do was stabilize me and send me on to Russia. When we left Cuba for Russia, we took off from a different city. This time the immigration officer appeared taken aback, his eyebrows raising in clear astonishment as the computer processed my passport. I experienced a sense of déjà vu from my previous encounter. This one morphed into something more convoluted. 30 agonizing minutes spent in bureaucratic purgatory, waiting for a senior officer to be summoned to the airport, the sole person seemingly possessing the key to my escape from the island. What if the FBI's pursuit of me is just a cover-up for their own failures? Can't shake the feeling that they're just shrouding all their questionable maneuvers behind an impenetrable wall of bureaucracy. What's truly happening now is nothing short of a bureaucratic cover-up. The intelligence community's genuine interest in me evaporated ages ago. This is purely the FBI scrambling desperately to conceal their own incompetence and missteps, a pathetic attempt to salvage their reputation at my expense. My son is approaching 29 years of age now. For years, they branded him as missing, a label that clung to him until he was 25. What finally broke this bureaucratic stranglehold? Not their diligence, but my viral TikTok that exposed their wrongdoings to the world. Not only have they ravaged my life, but they've shattered his as well. They've thrust him into an unwanted global spotlight, plastering his photos and intimate details across the world stage, a violation that continues to haunt him well into adulthood. The Pennsylvania ruling against me? Shattered, thrown into the legal trash heap where it belonged. That decree never even dared whisper criminal allegations against me, yet still the FBI hounds me relentlessly, their footsteps always echoing just behind mine. His mother to this day still owes me tens of thousands of dollars in child support, a mountain of debt that towered over $22,000 as of January 2011, not even counting the penalties or interest that have surely ballooned since. She hasn't surrendered a single dime to me. Authorities revoked her passport and driver's license. The FBI swooped in like guardian angels, collaborating with a judge to sweep these penalties aside, magically restoring both her passport and driver's license with a wave of their bureaucratic wand. The comments are the lifeblood of this video's reach. They pump it through the veins of the internet. Speak your mind, blast this across your networks. Each new follower becomes another soldier in our army. Every repost another battle cry in our war. I'm desperate for your backing in these darkest of hours. And before I vanish again into the shadows, allow me to unmask the FBI prosecutor who meticulously engineered this hellscape I've been forced to call my reality.
I was placed into situations very early on in my law career that I really had no business being involved in. I was put into hearings where, the other side was manned by very skilled and powerful lawyers at big law firms, and I was standing there like I had no clue what was going on. And I just think I had this one hearing down in Washington County in an area of the law that I had no experience in and knew nothing about.